I do not protest. I record the time. I open the one-page guide I gave to Ava and slide a printed copy onto her desk. 3 boxes, 3 arrows. When to escalate and to whom. She looks up with the seriousness that suits the work. Thank you, she says. Her voice holds both gratitude and worry, like a string pulled tight enough to sing. Blake walks the aisle with a tablet tucked against his ribs. He is composed, almost tender, the way a person can be when he believes he is carrying a necessary burden. We are moving quickly this week, he tells a circle of analysts. There will be re-interviews for alignment. It will be brief. He meets eyes with care, one by one, as if he wishes to borrow trust rather than seize it. By noon, another privilege closes with a polite tone. A dashboard I once designed requests that I contact an administrator. I am the administrator, or I was. I write that sentence on my legal pad and sit with it until the pressure leaves my chest. When the pressure is gone, the fact remains, calm and square as a brick. In the late afternoon, Ava appears with her notebook and a visible ache. They are asking me to prepare a sign-off, she says. She does not reach for the pen. She stands very still, as if stillness might be the correct answer. I tell her, you do not sign if you are not the officer of record. You document and you escalate. That is integrity, not defiance. Her shoulders loosen by 1 degree. She writes the sentence in her notebook as if she plans to carry it across a river. Dusk gathers early over Cleveland. The windows hold the color of ash. At 5:30, the message arrives. Human Resources requests my presence at 4:15 tomorrow. The subject line is soft, almost courteous. The meaning is not. I step outside into the steady wind and watch it lift a stray leaf and set it down again. I consider the shape of the decision that has been walking toward me from the first day of the new plan. It has arrived and it is looking into my face. The next afternoon is brief and exact. A neutral room, a neutral chair, a neutral folder that contains the sentence that changes my employment. Redundancy. It is a word that suggests safety, like a second rope on a mountain. In this room, it is a blade wrapped in cotton. I listen to the script with an attention so complete it makes a silence inside me. When the pen arrives, I take it and sign with a steady hand. I would like a printed copy, I say. The pause is small, then the printer begins, line by line, like a distant rain. I walk back to my desk and open the locked drawer. The notarized document lies where I left it, patient and ready. Voluntary relinquishment of operating authority. The title is a doorframe. I read it once more. The state recognizes one named individual for specific operating licenses. If that individual withdraws, those licenses pause until a new officer is approved. This is not punishment. This is design. It is the way a bridge asks you to respect weight. I file the form before the end of the business day. The system confirms receipt with a neutral courtesy. The courtesy feels almost kind. I log the time. I wipe my keyboard clean and fold the yellow card that marks the inspection window. I take nothing that is not mine. I leave nothing that should remain. The first tremor arrives 30 hours later. A vendor requests confirmation of the officer of record for a shipment that cannot move without a named signature. The reply, pending, begins a chain that gathers speed in the walls. A scheduled data transfer returns a refusal. The state portal recognizes no officer for the line in question. A supervisor attempts to update the contact field and receives a notice that a contact is not a credential. The tone of the room slopes from brisk to brittle. On the dashboard, green softens to yellow in small illuminated squares, like a meadow losing sunlight. By the second morning, 2 yellows become 5. By afternoon, 1 tile turns red. People gather in brief clusters that form and dissolve without speaking loudly. In the glass of a conference room door, I see my own reflection passing. I feel no triumph. I feel the ache of a system that I cared for as if it were breathing. Ava sends a message in the evening. They want me to sign. I will not. I tell her, document, escalate, and rest. Courage is quiet at first. She replies with a small icon of a page and a checkmark. In my kitchen, Maya works a math problem and asks if I'm all right. I tell her the truth that fits inside her world. Some people made the wrong change in the wrong order. We will be all right because we will tell the truth in the right order. She leans against me, and I feel the measure of what I am keeping safe. On the 3rd day, the door to the executive suite opens and Sloane returns from the airport with a storm in her stride. The operations room receives her like a courtroom receives a judge. No one dramatizes anything. People offer facts. Pending reauthorization. Officer of record unassigned. Vendor contracts paused. Inspection window active. The words are not weapons. They are weather reports. Sloan looks at Blake. He does not flinch. I believed a reassignment would suffice, he says. I misunderstood the nature of the authority. The sentence cost him something. He pays it. Sloan turns to legal. Path forward. Legal answers with sincerity that has no spin. We require a new officer approved by the state. We can invite Ms. Quinn to consult during transition. The invitation arrives that evening. It is generous and polished. There is an offer of a consulting term, a promise of bonuses upon restoration, and a request for full confidentiality. There is no apology. There is no language about rebuilding a culture that understands why a name on a line matters. I read it twice. I rest my hands on the table and listen for the line inside me that tells me what is right. At 9:30, another message lands, small and bright as a lighthouse seen across winter water. The subject line is simple. Director of Compliance Strategy. Immediate discussion. The sender is Stratacore Biosystems. The body of the email is brief and clear. They value a compliance-first culture. They wish to build a living academy so that authority does not live in one set of hands, but in a trained succession of hands. They have the resources to do it properly and the patience to do it well. I sit very still in the light from my kitchen window. Snow begins to fall beyond the glass, soft and exact, the way a system looks when it is working. 2 messages wait, side by side, each with its own future folded inside it. One asks me to put out a fire in a house that will not examine why it burns. The other asks me to design a house that will not mistake matches for candles. The clock in the hall shapes a quiet circle of sound. I breathe once for the work I have done, and once for the work I have not yet done. Then I lift my hands to the keys and decide which door I will open. I read each offer as if it were a corridor, and then I stood where the corridors met. The apartment was quiet except for the snow tapping the window. My hands did not tremble. I wrote 1 reply to Northbridge and 1 reply to Stratacore. I thanked Northbridge for the invitation and attached a brief set of documents. The notarized relinquishment notice, the confirmation of receipt from the state, and a screenshot of the dashboard 72 hours after my exit. I did not threaten. I did not persuade. I wrote, "These are the facts as the system recognizes them." I sent the message and closed the lid of the past. Then I opened the future. I wrote to Stratacore and accepted a conversation the next morning. The email was simple and exact. They would like to discuss a director role with a mandate to build a training pathway for successor officers of record. The phrase that held me was not salary or title. It was a culture that treats authority as stewardship. I slept without dreams. At 8, the call began. A steady voice from Stratacore described what they wished to build. No heroics, no single point of failure. A living academy, a documented apprenticeship, a practice of sober drills that prepare people when no one is watching. The words felt like stones placed in a river, one after another, until a crossing appeared. I said yes. The word left my mouth and turned into air that I could finally breathe. Across the city, the inspection clock moved in its quiet circle. Day 3 of the window. The state inspectors arrived at Northbridge at 10. They did not arrive to punish. They arrived to observe. The lobby announced them with a soft tone, the way a hospital announces an arrival that will change the day. In the operations room, screens reflected their badges like small moons. Sloan stood with the leadership team at a table that had held celebrations and late-night rescue plans. Blake was there, pale from sleep that had not done its work. Legal was there, kind and blunt. The lead inspector spoke in a careful voice. "We need to meet with the current officer of record." There was a hush that did not feel empty. It felt like a held breath. Legal answered, "There is no approved officer at this time. Reauthorization is in process." The inspector nodded once and looked down at a list that did not change its mind. The conversation that followed was not theatrical. It was exact. Certain activities would pause until an officer was approved. Certain shipments would remain in a warehouse until the proper signature existed again. The law did not slam a door. It set a weight on a hinge and measured whether the hinge could hold. When the inspectors left, they did not leave anger. They left a request for a plan. In the afternoon, Sloan asked for a meeting with Blake and the heads of operations and legal. I did not attend, but a former colleague sent me notes from the room. Sloan entered without haste. She placed the printed termination file on the table as if she were placing a ledger. She did not raise her voice. She lowered it. "We did not remove a roll," she said. "We removed the signature the law recognizes." No one corrected her. There was nothing to correct. Blake swallowed and stood straighter. He did not defend himself. I believed reassignment would be sufficient. I did not understand the nature of the named authority. He looked not at Sloan, but at the window, as if the city itself needed to hear him say it. Then he turned back and continued. "I propose that we never place this weight on one person again. We need a training path, a second seat, and a documented handover. I am prepared to stay and build it." The room accepted the sentence. It was an offering, not an excuse. That evening, a new email from Northbridge reached my inbox. It was generous. It included a short-term consulting proposal and a confidentiality clause to quiet the story. It did not include an apology or a plan for systemic change. I read it once, then replied with restraint. I declined. I attached the same documents as before and wrote, "When a bridge fails, you do not ask the former engineer to stand beneath it and hold it up with her hands. You design a stronger bridge." 2 hours later, I accepted Stratacor's formal offer. The signature felt like a door closing and another door opening on the same hinge. The next morning, Stratacor sent a welcome package that looked less like a celebration and more like a toolkit. Laptops, procedures, a blank syllabus for the academy we would build. The first page bore a sentence that I printed and taped above my desk. "Process is a promise." In the first week, I met with a small team and walked them through the map I had kept in my head for years. We did not name the old company. We named the essential facts. What an officer of record is. Why the state trusts a name and not an email address. How to prepare a folder that would reassure an inspector who arrives at 10 on a Tuesday. We wrote scenarios on a whiteboard and enacted them with quiet attention. No one argued. No one performed. We built a practice. Some nights, after Maya was asleep, I stood at the kitchen window and looked into a darkness that was textured with snow. Relief can be bright and still carry sorrow. I did not celebrate Northbridge's struggle. I mourned the part of me that had spent a decade building a vessel that did not learn how to float without me. But grief did not own the room. Work did. Work is a kind of love when it is done for the health of others. On the second Friday at Stratacor, I received a message from Ava. The subject line was a single word. "Thank you." In the body she wrote, "Your 3 rules carried me through my first interview with an auditor." I did not sign. I documented. I escalated. I slept. I sat back and felt the world arrange itself by a degree that mattered. A week later, Sloan called me. There was no attempt to reverse the past. She asked one question that was generous and exact. "What would you write on the first page of a policy so this does not happen again?" I said, "Authority must have a path for succession. Do not admire the keyholder. Train them, document them, build the second key before you need it." She thanked me. We ended the call with a respect that did not demand friendship. The weeks moved. The storm around Northbridge softened, then thinned. The appeals progressed. The board meetings lengthened and contained fewer speeches. Blake remained, no longer the face of a new age, but the hands that turned the heavy work of repair. He made fewer promises and wrote clearer memos. He attended a Saturday session at Stratacor's academy without telling anyone who he was. He took notes with the concentration of a student who has learned to listen. On a quiet Monday morning, I arrived early and made coffee in a room that smelled like paper and purpose. I pinned a small blue card to my monitor with 4 words in careful ink: "Teach what you know." I looked at the empty classroom and imagined it full of people who would one day hold doors open for others without applause. A caption belongs here, at the edge of the story, where action settles into consequence, and consequence becomes instruction. 6 weeks later, Northbridge appoints a new officer of record. An email arrives in my inbox that afternoon, unsigned by design. It contains a photograph of a dashboard that is green again. Below it, 5 words that speak quietly and carry weight. Your rules kept the lights. The room is quiet now, the kind of quiet that arrives after the last door closes and the last echo settles. Papers rest where they belong. Monitors breathe a calm green. Somewhere an inspector lifts a clipboard, nods once, and moves on. This is the sound of a system at peace. It does not sing, it holds. What remains is not victory, it is understanding. When they removed a name from a line, they did not simply reduce headcount. They removed a promise the law recognized. A promise that had been kept carefully, day by day, by a person who understood why a key must have a keeper. In the end, the lesson did not arrive in a blaze. It arrived in a sentence written on a whiteboard, in a classroom where future caretakers learned to stand where they were needed. Authority is stewardship. Process is a promise. Build the second key before you need it. I think of the people who watched this story unfold. Some of you have been called legacy. Some of you have been told that experience is a cost that must be cut. If that is you, hold to the true weight of your craft. Your value is not a slogan or a title. It is the quiet reliability that keeps lights on, shipments moving, and lives safe. Document what you know. Teach it until it does not belong to you alone. Strength is not a secret. It is a shared discipline. I think also of those who must lead in difficult rooms. Efficiency is not the opposite of respect. You can streamline and still see the human being who holds the hinge. When a bridge shakes, you do not blame the span. You study the bolts. You study the wind. You build a design that does not fail in the same place again. If this story found you at a desk late at night, if it placed a steadier pen in your hand, I would like to hear what it brought to you. What promise are you keeping where you stand? What key do you hold? And who are you teaching to hold it next? Share your thoughts below. Your words may be the map for someone who is standing at a difficult door. And if you would like to walk further with stories like this, where the lesson is earned and the light returns one measured switch at a time, you are welcome here. Subscribe if you wish. It helps the work continue. Either way, thank you for listening and for the quiet labor you carry into the world. By the time the meeting invite slid across my screen, the dashboard was still green, and I was already a ghost in my own house. They called it redundancy, a tidy word for erasing a name from a line the law actually reads. What they did not know was simple and heavy. Every operating license in this building breathed through one signature, mine. When they cut the roll, they cut the oxygen. This is how the lights dimmed, and how I learned to turn them back on. The screen glowed a calm green, as if the building were breathing in its sleep. Every panel on the internal compliance dashboard read, active. The lights of Northbridge Therapeutics reflected in the glass like a city at dawn. I stared at the grid, counted the lines the way some people count breaths, and felt the spine of the day settle. Then the meeting invite slid across my monitor like a shadow. They called me legacy overhead. The words did not bruise. They arranged the air. I set my palms on the desk, pressed once, and opened a mirrored folder where I kept the ledger that mattered. I named it the way I always did when the world grew loud, quiet, and precise. License Ledger version 2. 39 active operating licenses, each one tethered to a single name that the state recognized as responsible. Mine. The Cleveland wind pushed at the windows. Somewhere down the hall, a printer clicked. I lifted my badge and walked toward the open floor, where the company liked to arrange people into faith. On the wall, a row of screens cycled through slogans about innovation and mercy. Underneath them stood Blake Morton, the new head of efficiency, bright-eyed and concentrated, as if he had been poured into his suit and cautioned not to wrinkle. Blake's voice carried like a polished shoe on tile. "We are going to streamline legacy responsibilities," he said. He did not look at the wall of screens. He looked at people. A few faces lit with relief, as if a tight knot would finally loosen. A few faces tightened, as if an old scar had been touched. I am Harper Quinn. For 10 years I have been the person whose name appears on the papers that quietly allow certain doors to open and certain machines to turn. I believe in process the way a lighthouse believes in water. It does not exist to be admired. It exists to keep something from breaking. Blake spoke of efficiency in a soft, persuasive cadence. He offered new ladders for old walls and diagrams where people became arrows. I marked each phrase without lifting my pen. Behind his curving lines, I saw the narrow corridors where law meets consequence. When the meeting broke, an intern with a neat ponytail hovered at the edge of my desk. She introduced herself as Ava. She had a notebook and an earnestness that made me kindly. "I will be helping with pre-inspection tasks," she said. She pronounced each word with care, as if it might slip if she hurried it. I nodded and showed her a one-page checklist I had drawn the previous winter. It had 3 boxes and 3 arrows. The title was plain: When to Escalate and to Whom. She read it twice and folded it like a letter she meant to keep. By noon, my calendar began to ripple. Access permissions shifted. A shared folder changed hands. I did not flare or complain. I noted the time. I opened the license ledger again. In the top corner, there was a compact paragraph that few people ever ask to read. It defined a role called the Officer of Record. The state recognizes one individual as responsible for specific operating licenses. If that named individual voluntarily relinquishes the role, the authority to operate under those licenses is paused until the state approves a new officer. It is not drama. It is a door with a key. I leaned back and pictured the system as a map. Each license was a switch. Each switch had a hand. If the hand stepped away, the switch did not move by committee vote. The switch waited for a new hand the state would trust. I closed the ledger and stared at the light across the floor. Somewhere behind it, a winter cloud was traveling. That afternoon, I walked past Blake and heard him speaking to the chief executive officer, Sloan Whitaker. Sloan wore calm the way some generals wear quiet. She had returned to Cleveland after a week of board meetings on the coast. Blake used phrases that were crisp and noble. Sloan listened like a surgeon. She asked one question that reached me across the hall. What happens when we reassign functions tied to named authorities? Blake answered carefully, "We will update contacts." Sloan nodded without comment, and my chest tightened a fraction, the way a house tightens before a storm moves over it. At 5:30, when most conversations had thinned to the hum that offices make before the janitorial crews arrive, I took a manila folder from my drawer. Inside was a document I had drafted months earlier and left unsigned. Its title was exact: Voluntary Relinquishment of Operating Authority. It was not a threat. It was a boundary. I slid the paper back into its sleeve and locked the drawer. On my way out, the sky over Lake Erie held a late blue. I turned toward the notary on Euclid Avenue. The office was above a nail salon that smelled faintly of lilac and acetone. A woman with kind eyes stamped the page that would matter only if I decided it should. She said, "You can file it when you are ready." I said, "I may never be." She smiled as if she understood a different sentence beneath mine. At home, my daughter Maya worked a science problem at the kitchen table. She tapped her pencil with authority and told me that mass and weight are not the same. "Weight depends on where you stand," she said. The truth of it crossed the room and sat down with me. I kissed the top of her head, measured the warmth of it, and brought out a pan for dinner. When she went to bed, the house settled into the soft clicks that reassure mothers. I opened my laptop and made a mirror backup of the ledger. No names that did not belong to me. No data that did not need to travel. Only the map of the switches and the dates they demand attention. I set alarms for the inspection window that had been on our operations calendar for months. It is not a date. It is a span. 10 to 14 days when the state may visit a site without warning. It is a promise that you ought to be ready even when you do not expect to be observed. I logged the window on a yellow card and placed it beneath my keyboard at the office the next morning, the way sailors place a compass where the hand can find it without looking. In the second all-hands of the week, Blake stood again beneath the screens. He spoke about a re-interview process designed to align roles with vision. He thanked historical contributors for their foundation. The words hovered a moment and then settled on the floor like a thin layer of ash. I did not ask to clarify. I watched the faces around me, the hopeful ones and the tired ones, and felt a different kind of weather form in the room. After the meeting, my phone buzzed. A message from my sister, Lena, who teaches second grade in a town with longer winters than ours. I had written to her late the night before. Her reply was steady. "Do the next right thing and keep your paperwork clean." It sounded like a prayer she had rewritten for my trade. Near the end of the day, Blake sent a company-wide email. The subject line was simple: "Legacy tasks will be reassigned next week." The body offered reassurance in even lines. Processes would continue. We would not feel disruption. I closed the message and lifted the yellow card again. Inspection window, 10 to 14 days. The map inside my head aligned with it and clicked. A quiet answer rose in my chest, sober and whole. If they remove the name on the key, who opens the door when the state knocks? I rested my hand on the locked drawer where the notarized document slept and watched the last green square on the dashboard breathe once. Then hold. Morning arrives with a thin light that does not quite warm the glass. I badge in and the lobby breathes me upward. On the operations floor, the air is orderly, as if an invisible hand has smoothed it. I open my laptop and feel the day lean forward. 2 alerts wait in the corner of the screen, small as pins, sharp as pins. The first informs me that my secondary administrator role has been reassigned. The second says a shared folder no longer recognizes my key.